Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Wake Up Charlotte to Go. We made it through the week.
Friday, y'all.
Yeah, Larry's going to have much more on your forecast for today and the weekend. Some rain on the way, Larry, but hard to believe 34 years ago today, Hurricane Hugo made landfall.
I think I walked around this building this morning. I went, you weren't here, you weren't here.
No, I don't think any of us were here, and some people in this building weren't even
That's
born.
what I'm talking about. Somebody weren't even around that time. Yeah, 34 years ago, made landfall around midnight near Charleston, South Carolina, with storm surge up to about 25 to 30 feet.
Yeah, look at this video. The Category 4 storm was one of the strongest and costliest hurricanes ever for the U.S. If you lived in the Charlotte area in September of 1989, you probably have a story. Chime in the chat below if you were, if your parents were, if your grandparents, and you remember this. A lot of people remember this. Hugo was responsible for more than 100 deaths and billions. That's billions of dollars in damage. Our old building saw damage from Hugo as well. Larry, covering that storm back then, he was in that old studio, that other building, when, Larry, part of the ceiling caved in. Here, let's take a look at this.
Okay. Gust up to about 100 miles an hour, Shaw Air Force Base. I've been distracted because, as a lot of people are experiencing, part of our ceiling just collapsed in here. This is a very serious system that is going through Charlotte.
You saw me glance over. Because more kept falling. About 500 pounds of ceiling material came through right in the studio, about 10 feet away from me. In the old building, there's a 1,200-foot tower, a TV tower next to it, with 1,000-pound cables coming off. One of the cables snapped, hit the roof of the building, and then pushed down through the ceiling and collapsed in the studio. Luckily, there were only about 8 of us in the whole building covering the storm. Steve Raleigh, who was the other meteorologist there, he was in the newsroom, in addition to Rick Jackson, who was the news anchor. So he goes, Larry, we'll get back to Larry. Larry's on his hands and knees.
You said you crawled out.
Crawling out of there. I thought the whole ceiling was going to cave in.
Well, yeah.
Joy chiming in, saying, I've been afraid of wind ever since Hugo rampaged through Charlotte.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you said that was probably one of the biggest impacts of the storm, right? Was the wind damage.
It wasn't rain, it was the wind damage. And power outages. There were people without power almost up to a month. We didn't have power for 3 weeks. A tree came to the front door of the house where I live. I wasn't at home, but the front door. Yeah, everybody has a story. And there were literally thousands of trees knocked down in Charlotte.
And what's interesting, of all the hurricanes I've covered here when you go to the coast, there's like, well, it's not Hugo. They always compare to that.
Oh, yeah.
That's the one.
And one thing about this system, as you mentioned, it was wind. How rare it is for a storm to be moving that fast, because oftentimes once they hit land, it hits friction, it slows down, and actually accelerated. And that's why Larry was dealing with hurricane force winds even here in the Charlotte area.
We had winds up gusting to 90, sustained at hurricane force winds in Charlotte. I mean, it's unheard of. And at that time, we didn't have the technology to tell anyone in advance that we'd have a hurricane here. I mean, even in Charleston, I remember the night before, around 9 o'clock, the night before the hurricane hit in Charleston, looking at this storm, monster storm in the Atlantic Ocean. I said to Steve Raleigh, the other meteorologist, said, Charleston doesn't even have any idea what's going to hit them. We didn't have any idea what was going to hit us.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a nightmare for the people living in this area.
And so this graphic is from the track of the storm, right?
Yeah.
And the damage that it caused.
This is all the data that I can get. What I think is most astronomical here is that Larry was mentioning $11 billion. That's the totality of Hugo, because it wasn't just the effects here in the United States. It also hit some of the Lesser Antilles, part of Puerto Rico, but it was $9 billion, the official, that came down for the Carolinas. Yeah. But if you translate that to 2023 U.S. dollars, it's $22 billion worth of damage. So it's a top 20. And at that time in 1989, this was the most costliest storm in U.S. history. It was outdone by Andrew 3 years later. As Larry mentioned, it made landfall around midnight, Sullivan's Island. There they had a peak storm surge of 19.8 feet. And then 135 to 140. Larry, I've seen different reports of 135, 138, 140. But I think the craziest thing was talking about how the speed of it. That was midnight that it made landfall. I saw the next report, 6 a.m., that it was a tropical storm over the mountains.
Yeah, it really picked up steam. It moved through Charlotte and was moving around 35 to 40 miles an hour. It moved across Hickory, then headed to the mountains, and then made a turn up towards Pennsylvania. a fast-moving storm system. But when it hit South Carolina, McClellanville, a little community north of Charleston, storm surge was over 20 feet. That's a wall of water.
I was just about to say, literally.
And luckily, it's not populated area, but it just took down really hundreds of thousands of trees in that area, right, in South Carolina.
Craig Poole chiming in saying, I think 90% of Charlotte was without power during Hurricane Hugo. How are we looking today, though, Larry, here?
Today, we'll talk about a day with decent weather here, but first take a look and show you what's going on down. This is right now in Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. You can see that's some heavy surf right there. That's where there's rip currents. Do not go in the water.
Don't go swimming.
Please
yell
out
at
of
you.
the water. That's at Bar Harbor. Our camera, you can see fair skies here. Nothing going on here today. I think with some cloud cover later in the afternoon, we'll be in the upper 70s for temperatures. As you can see, 1 a.m. in the mid 60s. But the issue is the fact that we're dealing with a tropical alert. It's interesting. This is not a named storm, Chris. At the moment, could become Ophelia. That's the next name on the list.
So you see, it looks like almost a typo. It's like, what's Larry doing? PTC number 16. It gets very complicated. So this only started a few years ago with the National Hurricane Center. Yeah, it's potential tropical cyclone number 16. So Larry clearly couldn't put all that on there. All that means is usually when communities within a 48-hour period are going to be affected by a storm, but yet it is not a named storm at that point. They aren't tracking it. They aren't saying the update for this said storm. They're just saying that there's a good shot that right before this makes landfall, it's going to have the right criteria. That's a center of circulation. It ditches its fronts. It's either a warm core storm or subtropical right there. So regardless of it being subtropical storm Ophelia or tropical storm Ophelia, it's still going to have the winds that are as powerful as a tropical storm. There's just a lot of set check boxes that need to be checked before it becomes named.
Yeah, let's go back to the graphic. Let's talk about the extent of this. It really, right at the moment, all the way from Virginia Beach and Norfolk all the way down to Charleston and South Carolina. That's the warning area. But at the moment, the storm is way out there in the Atlantic Ocean. The center of circulation is about 350 miles from Charleston, South Carolina. It's farther back than that rain. That band of showers just off the Carolina coastline. It'll move in. In fact, this is Futurecast. You can see, we take you up to a time frame. This is 4 p.m. this afternoon. Heavy rain from the Outer Banks all the way just east of Raleigh down to Wilmington, Riceville Beach, Carolina Beach. This takes us as we head right into early evening, about 8 o'clock. Notice Charlotte's nowhere near that with rain, and then we start to see getting closer to us, and this gets into early tomorrow morning over towards Wadesboro and Rockingham. I would say between about 4 and 8 a.m. we could see some light rain showers here. West of here, they won't get any rain at all, so we're not expecting a lot of rainfall here. Chris, it's interesting, the amounts of rain that we could get here, really not that much.
No, and those numbers came way down, too, because it was looking like there would be the outer bands of this that I saw at one point during the noon show, Rockingham, and anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of rain. So that's a nice improvement. So I think that what happens when it makes landfall, it falls apart quickly.
Yeah, let's go back to if you could show the graphic. It's very important to show this. And let's talk about what's going to happen east of here. Along the Carolina coastline, from Elizabeth City all the way to the Outer Banks, anywhere from Corolla all the way down to Cape Hatteras and down into areas around Wilmington, that's some very heavy rainfall.
Over 5 inches at least in some locations.
At least, and there may be some more of that, more than that along the Outer Banks. We do also have the storm surge alert. You saw the heavy surf around Myrtle Beach. Dangerous situation out there. It would not, I mean, really, you're risking your life if you go in the water.
Jeez. All righty.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize when you're looking at the topography of North Carolina how far some of those inlands actually come in. Because look at New Bern. When Florence made landfall, New Bern was absolutely hammered by storm surge and rain just because that much water can come that further in. I remember Bath was another name that was mentioned during Florence, and this is not going to be anywhere near there. I'm just letting you know that even though this is just a tropical storm or might not even be named, you're still going to have the effects with that storm surge up to 4+ feet, and it's still going to be a pretty strong system.
Yeah, the winds right now sustained about 50 with some gusts up to around 65 miles per hour. So tomorrow morning it skirts, makes a turn. It heads kind of northwest and then takes more of a turn back to the north and is basically eastern North Carolina, particularly from around Cape Hatteras over towards areas around Little Washington, New Bern, up towards Greenville, Elizabeth City, and then makes a turn up the mid-Atlantic states. You know what? It's going to be a day with a lot of rain and gusty winds up the mid-Atlantic states all the way through tomorrow. That would be, you say, from Norfolk, Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, and that area will feel the effects of the storm. So it's going to cover a lot of territory. Covering our forecast, not too bad, right? The 7-day forecast.
No, this is looking great. Yeah, so Larry said this earlier, the pick of the weekend is Sunday. That's your day to do anything outside. Today is pretty breezy. You're going to notice the winds will pick up through the afternoon, and then heading to the next week, we have another wet pattern, and that's why we're a little bit cooler. And just let you know, football fans, any of those teams playing in the Northeast, it's going to be a wet and wild game, so maybe a lot of running the ball, say, like for the Jets versus the Patriots.
Anybody going to Festival in the Park? This weekend. Starts this afternoon.
Yep.
Tomorrow and again on Sunday. This is Festival in the Park weekend.
All right.
So I think as far as rain, this evening kind of breezy, a little bit of rain tomorrow morning, but I think the late afternoon should be okay. And Sunday, like you said, perfect day.
Yeah, impacts here before when we were talking earlier in the week was looking like, hey, we could see a lot of rain with this. Every day has been an improvement, at least for the Charlotte area.
All right, folks with weekend plans will be happy.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. And thanks for joining us for Wake Up Charlotte to Go. We'll be back on air at 11:30. Of course, you can download our app, too, to track the weather throughout the weekend as well. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend.